Jessica Walters at 42 was the epitome of success. Every morning, she woke up in her luxurious penthouse apartment in the heart of New York City, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the bustling metropolis. Her day started with a strong cup of coffee, her first business call of the day, and an avalanche of emails demanding her attention. As an executive at a top financial firm, Jessica had worked tirelessly for over 20 years to climb to the top. To her colleagues, she was a force of nature, driven, decisive, and unyielding in the face of challenges. But behind the glitz and glamour was a painful truth she rarely admitted. She had not spoken to her mother, Eleanor, in nearly 3 years. Jessica vividly remembered the last time she left the small coastal town where she grew up. It was a tense summer evening, marked by a heated argument about her refusal to take over the family's modest cafe. "Don't you understand?" Jessica had yelled. "I don't want to be stuck here for the rest of my life like you." Eleanor, her voice heavy with anger and disappointment, shot back. "You think I'm not good enough for you, don't you? Everything I've done was for you." Jessica had stormed out that night, vowing never to return. Since then, she had buried herself in work, filling her days with back-to-back meetings and endless deadlines. While thoughts of Eleanor occasionally surfaced, Jessica pushed them aside, convincing herself that time would heal their wounds. But on that fateful day, as she walked out of a high-stakes presentation, her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from her mother. Seeing the familiar number on the screen, Jessica hesitated. She ignored it at first, silencing her phone. Yet as the missed calls climbed to 7, she reluctantly answered. Eleanor's voice, frail and trembling, came through the line. "Jessica, I need you to come home immediately. I don't have much time left." The words stopped Jessica in her tracks. "Don't say such ridiculous things, Mom. You're just trying to guilt-trip me, aren't you?" she replied, trying to keep her tone indifferent. "Jessica, I'm serious this time. I need you. Now," Eleanor insisted. After a brief pause, she added, her voice softer, almost pleading, "I'm sorry for everything, but there are things I need to tell you before it's too late." Jessica didn't rush to book a flight. She claimed her schedule was too hectic and promised to call back later. But from the moment she hung up, an unsettling feeling began to gnaw at her. Over the next 2 days, she tried to focus on her workload, but her mind kept drifting back to memories of her childhood. The gentle, happy days spent with her mother, the cozy dinners in their small kitchen with the sound of waves crashing in the distance, and the arguments about her future, all played out like a slow-motion film in her mind. 2 days later, while reviewing a critical report, Jessica received a call from the hospital. "Miss Walters, your mother has been admitted to the emergency room. Her condition is critical." The news hit Jessica like a punch to the chest. Without a second thought, she booked a flight and left New York that evening. On the plane ride home, her thoughts raced. Why had she let things go on for so long? She had always assumed there would be time to mend their relationship, to explain herself, to say she was sorry. But now, she wasn't so sure. As the rental car meandered through the narrow roads of the coastal town, everything looked as Jessica remembered. The quaint houses, the endless stretch of beach, and the familiar lighthouse standing watch in the distance. But to her, everything felt different. Her mother's home came into view, a small 2-story wooden house that now seemed weathered and lonely. Jessica stepped out of the car and stood at the front door, staring at the place she had once called home. She took a deep breath and knocked, her heart heavy with anxiety and regret. Would this visit be too late to make amends? Jessica stepped into the old house, the place she had once called home, and was immediately overwhelmed by a flood of mixed emotions. The house, once vibrant and full of life, now appeared smaller and more worn than she remembered. The white wooden walls had faded to yellow, and the flower pots on the porch were now filled with dried, withered stems. Taking a deep breath, Jessica crossed the threshold, her heart heavy with apprehension. In the living room, Eleanor, her mother, sat in an old armchair, her frail body a stark contrast to the fiery determination still shining in her eyes. Jessica wanted to say something, but Eleanor spoke first, her voice steady yet tinged with warmth. "Jessica, I'm so glad you came back. I know this wasn't easy for you." Jessica felt a knot of guilt tighten in her chest but said nothing, only nodding. Eleanor handed her a small wooden box, its lid securely locked. "I want you to keep this, but don't open it yet. Wait until the right moment." Jessica took the box, its weight feeling heavier than it should, as if it contained more than just its physical contents. The following day, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her sudden departure left Jessica reeling. Though she had tried to prepare herself, the reality of losing her mother hit harder than she ever expected. Sitting by Eleanor's bedside, Jessica stared at her mother's still figure, tears streaming down her face. So many words were left unsaid, so many conversations unfinished, and years of distance now felt like a burden she couldn't escape. The funeral was a somber but deeply emotional affair. People from the small town gathered to pay their respects, sharing heartfelt stories about Eleanor. Jessica listened in silence as one person after another painted a picture of a woman who had been far more than just a mother. Eleanor had been a pillar of the community, helping countless people in need. She had supported struggling students with financial aid, assisted families during crises, and even spearheaded the creation of a women's support center in the town. An elderly woman named Martha approached Jessica after the service, her voice trembling with emotion. "Your mother was an extraordinary woman. She helped my family through the hardest time of our lives. Without Eleanor, I don't know what we would have done." Jessica's heart ached with regret as she realized how little she truly knew about her mother's life and the sacrifices she had made. As Jessica began sorting through Eleanor's belongings, a man named Robert Caldwell suddenly appeared. He claimed that Eleanor had committed financial fraud in her later years and had no rightful claim to the assets she had left behind. Robert threatened legal action to take control of the estate, including the women's support center Eleanor had founded. Jessica was outraged. How could someone like her mother, who had dedicated her life to helping others, be accused of such wrongdoing? Though she didn't yet understand the full scope of the situation, Jessica resolved to protect her mother's legacy at all costs. In court, Robert presented evidence suggesting irregularities in Eleanor's financial records. The accusations felt like a heavy blow to Jessica, but she refused to back down. She knew deep in her heart that the truth was far more complex than what Robert was portraying. Amid her desperation, Jessica remembered the wooden box her mother had entrusted to her. With trembling hands, she unlocked it, her heart pounding with anticipation. Inside were old letters and detailed financial documents. As she read through them, the pieces of a larger story began to fall into place. The letters revealed that Eleanor had used most of her personal wealth to help the community during a severe economic downturn. Instead of investing in personal gain, she had chosen to support struggling families, pay tuition for underprivileged students, and fund various charitable projects. One letter in particular caught Jessica's attention. It was addressed to her father and detailed Eleanor's strained relationship with Robert Caldwell. Once a close friend of her father, Robert had fallen out with the family after a bitter financial dispute. Eleanor had worked tirelessly to protect the family's assets from Robert's manipulative schemes, and the current accusations seemed to be his attempt at revenge. The more Jessica uncovered, the more she understood the silent sacrifices her mother had made. Eleanor had endured years of hardship and criticism, not out of fear, but to shield her daughter from the complexities of the family's struggles. Jessica realized that her mother's secrecy had been an act of love, a way to protect her. With the evidence from the box, Jessica returned to court with renewed determination. She presented the documents, proving that the so-called financial irregularities were, in fact, generous acts of charity. Eleanor's letters not only cleared her name, but also highlighted the far-reaching impact of her work in the community. After much deliberation, the court ruled in Jessica's favor, ensuring that Robert had no claim to Eleanor's estate. For Jessica, however, the victory wasn't just about preserving her mother's reputation. Through this process, she had come to see the depth of Eleanor's vision and the profound impact of her work. Determined to honor her mother's legacy, Jessica decided to stay in the town and dedicate herself to continuing Eleanor's mission. She took over the Women's Support Center, working to expand its services and help those in need. From a woman who had once been solely focused on personal success, Jessica transformed into a figure of hope and connection for the community, following in her mother's footsteps. 1 year later, the Women's Support Center was thriving. Jessica had not only rebuilt it, but also expanded its reach, offering more programs and resources than ever before. The town now saw her not just as Eleanor's daughter, but as a leader in her own right. Jessica herself felt a profound change. She was no longer the detached, career-driven woman she had once been. She had found a deeper purpose in life and a sense of fulfillment she hadn't realized she was missing. At the center's grand reopening, Jessica stood before a crowd of townspeople, many of whom had come to celebrate the milestone. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion as she addressed them. My mother always believed that each of us has the power to change the world, even with the smallest acts of kindness. Today, I hope we can all carry forward that spirit and make a difference together. As the crowd erupted into applause, Jessica felt a wave of peace wash over her. For the first time in years, she no longer felt torn between her past and present. She had found herself through the work her mother had started, and more importantly, she had reconnected with the values Eleanor had always held dear. The wooden box now sat safely in Jessica's office, a cherished reminder of her mother's love and the journey of discovery it had inspired. Jessica's life had turned a new page, and this time, she was ready to face the future with an open heart and the strength she had inherited from her mother. A year later, the Women's Support Center in the town had been fully restored and was thriving like never before. The once faded gray walls were now brightened with fresh coats of vibrant paint, and the interior had been transformed. There were new classrooms, dedicated counseling spaces, and even a small daycare for single mothers. Jessica had poured her heart and soul into this project, not only to carry on her mother's work, but also to fulfill a responsibility to the community she had once left behind. Jessica was no longer the woman solely focused on work and personal achievements. Instead, she had become a symbol of unity and compassion within the community. The townspeople looked at her with admiration, not just for what she had accomplished, but also for how she had embodied the values her mother had always lived by. At the grand reopening of the Women's Support Center, Jessica stood on the podium before hundreds of townsfolk. Her smile was radiant, but tinged with deep emotion. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice clear and steady. "A year ago when I returned, I didn't truly understand my mother or the incredible work she had done. But through this journey, I've come to realize that my mother didn't just build a center. She built hope. She created connections among people. And today, I hope we can continue to carry that torch." Jessica paused, her eyes scanning the familiar faces in the crowd. "My mother always believed that each of us has the power to change the world, even through the smallest acts of kindness. Today, I hope that all of you will join me in continuing this journey, spreading love and compassion to even more places." As Jessica concluded her speech, applause erupted, resounding across the space. Standing beside her were people her mother had once helped, now her friends and dedicated partners. Jessica's heart swelled with warmth as she looked at them. Some were former students who had once struggled financially but were now volunteering as teachers at the center. Others were single mothers who had once faced despair but were now leading programs to support children in need. In that moment, Jessica realized that the true legacy her mother had left behind wasn't wealth or fame. It was love and the bonds that connect people. This legacy hadn't only transformed the lives of the town's residents. It had also changed Jessica herself. From someone who had once pursued only personal success, she had found genuine purpose in giving and sharing. After the ceremony, Jessica lingered, gazing at the center. The laughter of children echoed from the daycare, and the lively conversations of women filled the conference rooms. She smiled, feeling as though she were standing at the beginning of a new journey, one where each day brought opportunities to build and connect. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she whispered silently, as if Eleanor were standing beside her. Jessica understood now that even though Eleanor was no longer with her, the love and strength her mother had passed down would forever be a guiding light in her life. If you enjoy meaningful and heartwarming stories like this one, be sure to subscribe to Life Stories 365. Every story on this channel is an inspiring journey, helping you find peace and meaning in life. Together, we can spread kindness and carry forward the journey of compassionate hearts.